Hello, welcome back to the channel. Before we begin, I would like to mention that a new podcast is up. It is called The Happy Apostate, and it can be found on Google Play, iTunes, Stitcher, anywhere else that you find your favorite podcast. You can search for my name, Isaac Coverstone, or simply the title, The Happy Apostate. I hope you'll give it a listen and enjoy as we bring out some new episodes in the coming days. Just a quick video. I wanted to go over a topic near and dear to my heart that I think needs a little more attention. And I apologize for the lack of content and the slow amount of videos coming out. Personal life has gotten a little busy and just haven't really found the time, and procrastination. So I wanted to discuss how important it is that we understand what evolution is. And not just what it is, but why it's correct, why it is vital to understanding biology and to progressing intellectually in our world. There are certain things you have to understand before you can understand something more complex. For example, you have to understand addition and subtraction and multiplication and division before you can ever get into a concept like algebra, a concept like calculus. You can't just skip right to the end. You have to understand the basics first. You can't just go straight to building a bridge without first understanding how to build a doghouse or something structurally simple before you go to something structurally complex. The same holds true in biology. Certain ideas, understanding how a cell is formed and what a cell consists of, that's all very important to know before you jump into different aspects of zoology and botany and so forth. Understanding evolution allows you to unlock all these other areas of living science that otherwise it would be impossible to know without this fundamental building block. And the reason this is an important topic is, especially in the United States, fundamentalist Christians are extremely resistant to the idea. The concept of evolution is it's very foreign and toxic to them. They will just immediately reject it. Many times I've been discussing things with Christians, and if they hear the word evolution, they just immediately are repulsed by it. And I realize this is, of course, not the case with every Christian group. There are many progressive Christians, the Jesuits, and some forms of perhaps the Baptists and Presbyterians, and certainly now Catholics are completely on board with evolution. They don't have a problem with it. So this video will be directed mostly at the extremists, the Southern Baptists, the Pentecostals, different forms of the Presbyterians, the JWs, the Mormons, some of the fringe groups that are typically resistant to science and forward thinking. So how do we know that evolution is not only real and true, but it's something that we can demonstrate to be true? Well, one way that's makes it pretty difficult to avoid as far as evidence goes, I would give you an example of human chromosome number 2. Now, just a little bit of backstory. A chromosome is a packet of genetic information. An adult human has a total of 48 of these, 46 chromosomes. And so 23 come from each parent and give you a total of 46 pairs. And so each chromosome is a string, so to speak, and after they're joined, they form an X. And then the genetic information is what allows cells to copy and eventually create a full human being after all the replications are complete. So it's a bundle of DNA. It's a compact, condensed form of DNA that allows cells to accurately duplicate, is boiling it down as simply as we can make it. And so what was always a big hurdle in terms of understanding evolution and why, how we evolved from other primates was always this concept of the chromosome count. Chimpanzees and bonobos are two closest cousins on the genetic tree. They all have 48 chromosomes. And anytime you take a living creature and you attempt to have it reproduce and you lose a pair of chromosomes or you add a pair, this is almost always fatal, or certainly it causes genetic disorders or deformities that can be, in the natural world, certainly deadly. In the modern world, this simply means that the person must be cared for full-time in order to survive. And so Down syndrome is a very common example of that. There's an entire list of genetic disorders caused by your chromosomes being out of whack as far as the wrong sequence, the wrong order, to any degree. So the question was always, how did humans lose a pair of chromosomes to go from chimpanzee or bonobo lineage and a common ancestor with those species to form Homo sapiens, to form the modern human? How did we get down that chain? And of course, there were other variations before that, Homo erectus and Neanderthal and Denisovans. These were variations of the human species prior to Homo sapiens. So how did we get to that point where we lost a pair of chromosomes without causing severe genetic disorders and loss of life? So here is what we have discovered. And again, this is perhaps in the last 100 years that this knowledge has come around. It's fairly recent. So one method of losing a chromosome without losing the information contained and without losing the critical data that permits the organism to function normally, one event that can occur is what's called a chromosome meld, or a joining. So a chromosome is a string. It's a long chain of molecules and proteins and acids that form this collection of data that allow the reproduction and replicating of cells. And so at the ends are telomeres. These are the caps that contain this ribbon, this chain of genetic information. And typically 2 chromosomes will be joined by what's called a centromere, and then this will create the single pair. And so you have 46 of these pairs, telomeres at the very ends, a centromere in the middle. And what could have happened, and again, what we can demonstrate actually did happen, is chimpanzee chromosomes, I want to say it's 13 or 16, as a pair. There was a genetic modification, there was a genetic random disorder that removed the centromere and allowed those two to merge together. And so we had chromosomes merge together. Now we have a chimpanzee or a bonobo or a relative of those species that is now walking around with 47 chromosomes. They have lost 1/2 of a chromosome and it merges together. You go from 48 to 47. So people say, well, great, how do you get to 46 then? What had to have happened, we see one animal perhaps go to the 47 count and they reproduce. What occurs then is that relative, that descendant of that particular living creature has the ability to replicate this 47 chromosome count, and they would carry that genetic modification further down. And again, because all the information is there, nothing's been lost, then you have a situation where it just keeps replicating. There's no loss of function, no loss of any particular vital organs or anything of the sort. And so you have a genetic lineage that has 47 chromosomes. Now, all that has to happen is one of the other descendants, could have been, a grandchild, it could have been a great-grandchild, two people, again, we'll call them people, but this is further enough back up the line, it's hard to say whether they were a human primate or if they were a primate. The dividing line is a little shady at this point. But two individuals, whatever they were, each with 47 chromosomes, would mate. Now you have two adults contributing the correct number to equal 26 pairs, or 23 pairs, for a total of 46 chromosomes. And so it's really just a matter of numbers and averages that eventually two adults with each 47 chromosomes would eventually mate. And so the evidence for this is still left in our DNA. The evidence is in our cells right now as we speak. If you looked under a microscope and you looked at a chromosome for an adult human, you would see human chromosome number 2 has existing a vestigial pair, not really, it's a vestigial remnant of the centimere that fell apart to allow those two chromosomes to merge. And so this is what you would expect if you saw a chromosome have that disorder, to lose the centimere and it would merge together. There would still be a tiny bit of matter that is related to that centimere that would still be there. It doesn't actually do anything. It doesn't provide that connection, but it's in the wrong place. Your telomeres are at the very tips and the centimeres at the center. Now two of these chromosomes merged. The telomeres are now in the center. There's parts of those telomeres in the center, and then there's evidence of the centimere that used to be at one end is now reversed. So we see the remnants of this genetic mutation in our own bodies. Every single human being has these. In addition, it's very well known that humans, bonobos, chimpanzees, share 98% of our genetic material. They're almost very, very small variation between the three species. Really, the biggest difference is the reduction from 48 chromosomes to 46. And I would highly recommend, if you want more gritty details on this process, look up the Wikipedia for human chromosome number 2. It's very informative, very interesting. And so this is one example of the really strong evidence we have that humans have evolved from other primates. But why is this important? Why is this more than just a piece of trivia? Why is this something that we really should pay attention to or care about more than just knowing the history of our species? Well, it's very, very simple. To know evolution, to accept evolution as a natural process across our world, it allows us to really, truly predict how organisms behave, how we can adapt to viruses and different forms of disease that otherwise would have perhaps run rampant. But by understanding evolution, we know how to trace diseases and various forms of parasitic life forms back to their origins, back to patient zero, as we call it. And so finding patient zero of perhaps AIDS would be critical to understanding where did this disease come from, and thus we can understand maybe methods of transmission. We can understand how fast is it changing and evolving, and we can follow the drug resistance of certain diseases. One huge area that we can understand evolution and how it affects us is in agriculture. Agriculture. By understanding how plants evolve, this allows us to breed strains of different crops, created the what we call the green boom. I want to say it was in the early 1900s when new strains of crops for grain and rice just dramatically allowed us to feed more people than we normally could. And it was, I just heard an interesting article about it. One man essentially pioneered this green revolution and how to grow much more productive crops for grain and rice and other cereal products. It is estimated that he saved 600 million lives simply by producing more food and helping other countries produce more food. And this eventually led to the United States exporting quite a bit of its grain and so forth because we just grew far more than we needed. And this came from understanding how living things operate. And there's so many implications and ramifications to this that ripple outwards. And if we start from the opposite perspective, that every species on this planet was created individually, completely isolated from each other, and we try to hold to this creationist mentality, and we use that as the basis for how we understand the natural world, it would completely destroy these concepts of how we understand viruses and agriculture and zoology. There's so many areas that this affects, and it would just simply not work. But because we understand things change and evolve, and one species is related to another species, this helps us go backwards and say, oh, this particular tree that we grow here in the Northwest, if we extract a particular chemical from this tree, we get a very powerful drug used in treatment of cancer, for example. And so we can't grow enough of these trees to produce enough of the drug to really be cost effective. But because we understand evolution, we say this tree is related to another species of trees, or maybe 3 or 4 other species of trees. From this, we can see the similarities between different species of trees. And this is not a hypothetical situation. This is literally a true statement as far as I'm going to call it a Pacific yew is the species of tree. And by studying these different species, we find that we can synthesize this material, or we can find multiple species of these rare trees that can give us a larger supply of the drug and so forth. But only by understanding evolution do we know to trace this family tree backwards. And we see this species of tree was not created as an adult pair. It was not created alone, but in fact it is directly tied to other species, and therefore we can trace that backwards. And this gives us, again, a much better footing in dealing with real problems in the world, versus the alternative of we have this life-saving drug from this one species of tree. You know, we can't get enough of this particular species of tree to grow, therefore the drug is never going to be cost effective and people are going to die. That's simply the only solution you would have if you only understood that every species is unique and they were created with no connection to each other. And so it's two different worldviews. One allows you to move forward and be effective. The other more or less chains you to the Stone Age mentality. And so people in the United States especially have to get over this hurdle that somehow religion is what holds us back from accepting the concept of evolution. And I think that's critical to our moving forward as a society. If we're all on the same page about this simple and, in my opinion, easy to understand topic, we can all stop wasting time with debate and educating people, and instead we come to agreement and we make forward progress. And I think that's it's important to know that it's not just, hey, there's this group of secular people that came up with an alternative to creationism. Well, there are no reasonable alternatives to evolution because nothing else has been demonstrated to be effective at understanding our natural world. There's no other explanation for how life came to be the way it is right now than evolution. To say, oh, we don't have enough facts, or science has been wrong in the past and therefore science is wrong now, this is terribly short-sighted and ignorant to say, when really we can demonstrate very strongly that, yes, this is the current understanding of our world, and it is highly unlikely that it's going to change anytime soon. If we do change our understanding of evolution, it will be a refining of the process of evolution, not to scrap it and start over with something else completely. And we certainly wouldn't scrap the concept of evolution for creation or intelligent design, because that would be completely ridiculous. As always, give it a like or subscribe and leave a comment below if you have any questions. Please be sure to check out the podcast and the blog. And as always, do your homework, do your own research, ask questions, never be afraid to doubt. Thank you for watching. Have a good one.